the Futures platform. And anyone that's missed the opportunity to come today will be able to watch those back. So as Neil said, please stay in the room during the break. This is kind of the first session, and so Steve doesn't have to move everyone around, and we're staying in the rooms. And if you are all right to use the chat function for questions and any kind of burning questions, please put your hand up and we'll come to you. But if we wait for the presenters to finish, then they might answer your question before you've asked it. So without further ado, I will hand over. Can I have the next slide, please, Hayley? I will hand over to our lovely colleagues from Carers Together and the Junction, who are doing their kind of the second year of this project. So they did the scoping the year before last, and then this year they've been embedding it, which Noah touched on a little bit when he spoke about his experience. So I will pass over to you both. You've got 10 minutes if that's okay.
Okay. Good morning all. My name's Lee O'Brien. I'm the Chief Executive of Carers Together charity based up in South Tees, so we cover Redcar, Middlesbrough. Also on the call is Beth Major, who's the Chief Executive of the Junction Foundation. They provide a range of information support services for young people, particularly those around young carers. So you've basically got two charities online at the moment who work together with Noah, as you've just heard Noah speak. So our role really was to pick up some of the work that we did from the sort of scoping project that we had initially onto the embedding project. Can I have the next slide, please? So yeah, so as the slide kind of says, it's really, I'm just going to give Beth and I are going to give a quick outline around the phase 2 project. And that was mainly around the development of the transitions passport. So we'll probably just flesh out slightly what Noah's spoke about previously, and we'll talk you through a bit more of the process about where we were and some of the strategic movement from there. Can you give me the next slide, please? So in phase 1, we submitted a bid around the scoping exercise to look at providing support, or to look at the needs around young adult carers. One of the reasons we kind of chose young adult carers was because obviously the Junction and Carers Together work really closely. So we already see a lot of these young adults coming through the services. And we're aware that there's quite a disengagement from services from young adult carers. So typically they fall off the radar at about 15, and then they'll reappear back in services at 25. Both Beth and I both know people who've been young carers from 8-year-old and are now still in their caring roles at 30-odd-year-old. And some of the gaps that's happened within that transition, we've seen the impacts. We know there's a disconnect between children and adult services and any systemic transitions, really. So we know that there's, particularly around education, health, social care, there's a lack of transitional support. We also know that there's a lack of data on any needs around young adults. We've got data around young carers, we've got data around adult carers, but those young adult carers, between 15 and 25, there's a lack of data. So we wanted to fill them gaps, really. We also wanted to pick up the opportunity around the co-production. So that was, again, the Junction and Carers Together working with young adult carers to move forward and look at needs. Can I have the next slide, please? So really, in phase 1, the question to all young adults was what would make a transition, a successful transition adulthood. So we had a group of young adult carers. Some were aged under 15, 14 to 15. Then we had another group 16 to 18. Then we had another group 18 to 25. So we brought all these carers together. We asked them all a number of questions through surveys and individual interviews, and we kind of got some responses back looking at how we could provide that support as two organisations, I guess. Can I have the next slide, please? So the answer really, and it's just following up on what Noah's just spoke about, really. What he spoke about was specific projects for young adults, and how they would share, who have shared experiences, and so they could talk about the transition support. So it was more coming away from an adult services and a young carer services into this kind of specific project that would support young adult carers aged 15 to 25. Can you have the next slide, please? So within the wider consultation, again, just following up on what Noah said, we kind of ranked some of the responses. And you can see there, the first response really was to work with education, health and social care so that we could identify and flag young adult carers before they started getting into the transition or while they were in transition. And again, you can see secondly, there was discussions around PHSE lessons, so that schools and colleges and education establishments were able to talk more freely, or to give more information to the rest of the groups around what it's like being a young carer and a young adult carer. And then thirdly, we were looking at specific life skills sessions from young carers. And then, as you can see there, also joint rank third was this Young Carers Passport. Now, the Young Carers Passport was something that was really, it was within our offer, really, of two charities. That was something that we could move on fairly quickly, fairly easily, that we could co-produce and get it I guess, get some sort of recommendations and approval, really, through our strategic partners. So we decided that we would pick up on the Young Carers Passport and move forward with that. As again, you can see the rest of the responses that came back there. But this is how the Young Carers Passport came to be. Can you have the next slide, please? So we looked at the results of phase one, and what we were trying to do was we wanted to not just provide a kind of a transition service, but we wanted it included in the tender specifications, so that it was commissioned through the local authorities in partnership with health providers, and that happened. So a lot of the information that we took out of the initial scoping, we were able to present to local authorities and other health providers, and the local authorities, I guess, listened really. So what they've done is they've actually they've commissioned a specific service that both Carers Together and the Junction will deliver. And also in phase two of the kind of initial scope and stuff was the co-production of the transitions passport. So we're actually we have completed a transitions passport for young adult carers. So we had two really good outcomes from the work that we kind of started. I'm going to hand you over to Beth, who'll give you a bit more detail now around the actual passport and some more of the work that came out of the scope and the embedding project. So I'll hand you over to Beth Major. She's Chief Exec from the Junction.
Thanks, Lee. Could I have the next slide, Verity, please? So I suppose this section is about kind of how we developed the passport. We worked with a core group of young adult carers who had been involved in phase one and others across both Carers Together and the Junction Foundation, and kind of young people who were really interested in the subject. And I think part of what John Moore has identified within their evaluation of the first phase of the project was, you know, a real desire to see change. I think we consult people a lot of the time, whereas actually what people want is change. So like I say, we felt really strongly that we needed to do stage two within our gift, and we were fortunate in the commissioners were open to listening really. So that's just some kind of pictures of the process, if you like. We had a day that young adult carers organised for other young adult carers to come up with the content of the passport. Then we moved to the kind of design stage, stop cutting things out and sticking things on A4 sheets of paper. Next slide, please, Verity. They kind of talked about I think because it's constant frustration for people who access services, that retelling of story. And they wanted it to reflect a journey and the changing situations that young people are going through young adult carers are going through within that transitions phase of their life. They gave feedback on the branding and what they wanted on the final logo design. We had some nervous moments where Purple Dinosaur was favoured at one stage, but they talked themselves out of that because it didn't scream, you know, young people friendly so much as Barney. They wanted a solution focused approach within the passport as well, which I think is really important. They did want to talk about challenges, but they wanted to talk about solutions within the same parts of the passport. So the passport covered kind of the current transitions, future plans, aspirations, interests and strengths, because I think, again, we wanted it to be a kind of, you know, that, yes, there is negatives of a caring role and challenges within that, but there's definitely positives and strengths as well, and bringing that to the fore and telling the full story of the young adult carer. Barriers related to their caring role that might affect their ability to progress both within employment, education and training, but within other areas of their lives as well. So potentially health, practical and financial issues that would need addressing to enable young adult carers to kind of present, and that practical support that sometimes is the deciding factor on young adult carers being able to sustain education, training and employment, and then the kind of plans for the future. Next slide, please, Verity. So that was the logo that was eventually chosen, and we scrapped the purple dinosaur, and you can move on to the next slide. So I suppose in terms of wider systems change and support, we have been working very closely with the South Tees Carers Forum, which links to our local health and wellbeing board, because I suppose the passport in itself is as valuable as it is taken seriously by the range of professionals that might support a young adult carer. We did receive feedback from professionals including health education, child and adult services, to encourage adoption and buy into the use of the passport. And we fed them, we kind of did a 360-degree thing where they were fed back to the young adult carers, and adaptations were made in kind of consensus, really. And the feedback was incorporated into the final design. Next slide, please, Verity. So the impact of and outcome, the final passport has now been approved by young adult carers, and the range of professionals on the South Tees Carers Forum. The transition services began jointly from the 31st of March this year, and it is a new service, and we are kind of making adaptations as we go along. But certainly, I suppose, the overall impact of the work is that the vision that young adult carers came up with within phase one has been realised. Work is ongoing at the moment to promote the recognition and the use of the passport with the full range of kind of people who may support young adult carers in the local area. And the services is now in a position where it has that resource to be able to provide that one-to-one and group support and any other practical support that young adult carers in transition may need to be able to meet that kind of plan that's contained within the passport. Next slide, please, Verity. So that's just a kind of snapshot of the final design that young adult carers came up with, and some of the sections of the passport within it. So, and I think that's it for me, unless there's any questions.
Thank you very much, both of you. I don't think there are any specific questions, just lots of kind of requests to connect with you to kind of think about how people can pinch with pride, as we say in the carers team, some of what you've been doing. And I know that the evaluation from Liverpool John Moores might also help people with that. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that, and we'll share the links to that after the event. I don't know if anyone has any questions that they want to ask. We have got a little bit of time before we pass on to colleagues from Blackpool. go on. I can see one hand is raised, but I can't see their name. So you go, and then
I think it's me. Sorry, it's Kelly Silver. I'm calling from Sutton Carers Centre, and I was just wondering, with the passport scheme, on a practical level, is it a physical kind of document that young carers are given that they can then share with professionals that they connect with?
It's electronic, because
Right.
again, part of but they can, and we do print them out for young people who want a hard copy. The idea behind keeping it electronic was the ability to delete anything they don't want to share with a range
I
of
see.
audiences, because very much we and they were conscious of the need for that to be owned by the young adult carer, not the service. And while they may want to share everything with a supportive pastoral tutor, they may only want to share, for example, the back page, which is the recommendations signed off by the support worker, with another audience.
I see. So it's got that flexibility
Yeah.
in it as well. And just from your experience, how's the buy-in been from kind of professionals in different avenues, so sort of social services and health, and has there been quite a lot of buy-in? Have they sort of
Initially, and we are,
accepted it?
yeah, initially we are at our very early stages, but actually all the feedback that we've had on passports has been really positive. I don't think people make the decisions they do because they lack compassion. I think
Yeah.
people make the decisions they do because they don't have all the information on the whole.
Yeah. And that's I think the good thing about the passport scheme is because it is a recognised kind of terminology and scheme, isn't it? So hopefully that's meant that people are quite open to it.
And generally we have had some reported kickback from young adult carers where they've said, you know, or young carers, more generally when they've gone into school or college and said, look, I need to keep my mobile on today because, you know, there's a health issue at home or whatever. But generally, if it's backed up by a support worker, that tends to happen less, or if it's challenged by a support worker, it tends to happen less.
Right.
And I think that the less people have to kind of challenge the system and advocate for themselves in every walk of life, the better, really.
Absolutely. Thank you.
thank you very much. So I will pass on, if we could have the next slide, please, Hayley. I will pass on to Samantha to talk about their project in Blackpool, looking at children who care. Are you there, Samantha? I can see that you're in the chat. Hayley, I don't know if in the chat you can see, but Samantha's name is showing us as a guest, and that she's on hold, and I don't know if we can change that. Sorry, everyone. Just bear with us. I'll try and get hold of Samantha.
What's Samantha's last name?
It's Howard.
I think she may have placed herself on hold.
Okay. I will just quickly try and drop her an email. You bear with us, everyone. Apologies about this. It wouldn't be an online event without some technical difficulties, would it? Right, what I'm going to do if I don't hear back from Samantha is ask for Steve to take us back to the main room so that we're able to listen to another presentation. Bear with me. So sorry about this, everyone. The only other thing I can think to do is if we move on to, and I think I can see them in the room. I think it's Paula and Andrew from Merton Mancap and Claire Thomas. If you're happy to kind of go next, and you have everyone here, I can see a nod from Claire.
Yes, hello. Yeah, we're fine, aren't we, Claire?
Is that okay? So if we pop onto you next, and there's kind of the 10 minutes to present, and then we'll try and get Beth back after the break. So as not as billed, I'm afraid, but I'll pass it over to Paula and Claire.
Yeah, hi
Thank you, ladies.
Hello everybody. Claire's going to pop in and out as needed if I go off key, and or if there's any questions that anybody needs answering. Andrew isn't here today. He's on another call somewhere else, so it'll be me. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Okay, next slide please. And the next one. Okay, so in phase one, for those of you who don't recall our project, we were looking at the effect of digital exclusion on carers of adults with a learning disability and or autism. And we came up with some quite interesting conclusions, one of which was, of course, that the carers, as we suspected, are quite significantly disadvantaged when it comes to digital inclusion. They're possibly one of the most excluded groups, and by digital exclusion we also include digital poverty, which means a very limited use of digital or the internet. We also found that it was a much more complex issue than we'd considered earlier. One of the things was that some of the carers that we found who had very low digital involvement were also excluding by proxy, if you like, the cared for person that they were looking after. So some of the assumptions they were making about digital, they were also applying to the person they looked after. So they were being excluded as well. We found that the barriers to exclusion were quite varied and complex, or the barriers that they perceived, shall we say, were quite difficult and complex. And it wasn't just as simple as, well, I haven't got a laptop, I haven't got a device, or I can't afford a device, or I can't afford Wi-Fi, or I don't know how to do it and I need training. So it wasn't quite as simple as that. So we felt that some of the projects around to help people were not really hitting the mark when it came to carers. They felt the internet is complex, costly, and quite often irrelevant. Irrelevant being one of the key words here, actually. They felt that it was of little value, it was inaccessible, and for the older ones in particular, it was just too late to start now. But one of the main things we did discover, of course, is that some of these barriers that were described by carers were easily overcome when they were given a personal hook which motivated them to explore further. So a lot of this, the barriers, were related to lack of awareness of how the internet could potentially improve and change their lives. And some of the things that affect carers, like social isolation, feelings of loneliness, struggle with finances, can actually be improved by access to the internet. And there is a lack of awareness amongst carers of this fact, but also how that would work. So next slide, please. So one of the recommendations, one of a few recommendations out of the first phase of research was that to try and overcome a little bit this personal hook idea, giving people an understanding that the internet isn't necessarily just for one particular usage. It isn't just for surfing or social media or email, and it isn't, and it actually can apply to lots of people for lots of different reasons. We recommended that an awareness film was created. Another reason why we recommended the film actually was because another output of phase one was that professionals such as social workers told us that they didn't feel confident to discuss digital confidence and digital awareness amongst people with a learning disability, autism, or their carers, because although we ourselves may be digital, may be highly technical in fact, it doesn't mean that we are confident enough to become trainers or to discuss with people things like accessibility features that we ourselves may not need. We are not experts in things like that. So how to use screen readers and so on. So the solution was blocked in a way a little bit by the lack of confidence of staff. So that's one of the reasons why we recommended this short film. The film uses behavioural insights theory, so it isn't a push film. It's more of what we call a pull film, in that we're not saying, hey, you should be digital, or hey, look, this is what's available for you to become digital. There's no judgment about people who are or who are not digital. What we're hoping is by giving a range of different people using the internet for a limited and varied way, but which changes their life, and also showing a few of the accessibility features, that people might just say to themselves, that could be me, but I don't know what to do now. And then at the very end, we describe the fact that there is this wide range of support available. Okay, I think maybe it's time to show the film. I think that's what the next slide is. Next slide. Oh no, we're just explaining our, sorry, next slide. We are of course, next stage is to try and put the film out to the people who need to use it. And being aimed at digital confidence, of course, we're not looking at digital channels to promote the film. So we're trying to promote it amongst professionals as much as possible. We're trying to make it a catalyst for conversation, and also trying to reach people who need to take that first step. So next slide, I mean, sorry. Right, here is the film. You can press play. Could we have some volume, please?
Haley's just working on that, I think, Paul.
Can you hear the sound?
No.
No, I'm wondering if it's because you're playing it through your PC that we're kind of getting the mute function, if that makes sense, on Teams.
Yeah.
Let me just try resharing it, because I think there might be an error with the audio. Just give me a minute.
No worries.
If it doesn't work, actually, it doesn't really matter, because part of the way in which this film might be shown is without sound. So if it's in a GP surgery or something, it may. So if we need to, we can play it without sound. It's nicer with sound.
And I can pop the link in the chat so that anyone that wants to have a listen.
Yes.
This app is really handy for checking for when my bus is coming.
Can you hear the sound now?
Yeah. Yes, but could we go back to the beginning, because
Yeah.
it's quite important. Thanks.
Thank you.
Computers, smartphones, tablets. For many people, these can seem pretty daunting, but look at what's possible.
I love to listen to music.
This app is really handy for checking for when my bus is coming. Most phones have got great cameras.
You can do your grocery shopping from the comfort of your own home.
I watch the football highlights on YouTube every week. I can do my exercise class at home. I attend job interviews on my laptop.
It's changed his life, having the iPad to communicate.
Mama biscuit, please, thank you. I love playing games on my iPad.
I
order my daughter's repeat prescriptions using my phone.
A few easily learned steps can make all the difference. Help with technology is available. Contact your local council or library to find out more.
Thanks. So that's the film really, and what Claire is now really working on is how to get the film out to the people who could use it. So the people at the front line. I think might be a slide on how we're doing that. Is there a slide at the end about? No. We have got a communication plan. Maybe Claire would like to say more about that. Would you, Claire?
Happy to. Yeah, I think it was in a couple of slides before. So we've got quite a thorough communications plans. We're focusing on Merton in the first instance, but also because I work from a South West London perspective, we're trying to get it out across all of our channels in South West London too. So if anyone wants to share the film, we'll be more than happy. It's not obviously branded just for Merton. Anyone can use it. And we're making sure, like as Paula said, we're using non-digital channels. So we're just trying to understand how we can sort of tap into GP systems and get it to people that actually need the film. So that's all from me.
Thank you both. I love that film. If anyone has any questions, then if you're okay to use the chat function, we've now got a break for 5 minutes. Sorry, our kind of tech challenges have shaved our break slightly short. So we've got a 5-minute break. If you all stay where you are, I'm going to leave, but Debbie is going to take over chairing this room. And Samantha should be here for 12:05 to talk us through the Blackpool Carers Young Carer kind of programme of work. And thank you all so much for your presentations and your engagement. It's super exciting. Take care, everyone. Hello, Reg speaking. Hello, how are you? Oh my God, am I panicking?
Hello, Hayley. Are we reconvening now?
Hi, Debbie. Yeah, I think so.
Thank you, Hayley. Hello, everyone. I'm Debbie Hustings. I'm the London Carers Lead, London Region Carers Lead. I'm on secondment from Heartland, so some of you may recognise me from the Surrey role. Have we got Sam? Is Sam back now to talk to us about Armed Forces Young Carers?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, Sam, how wonderful! A cause very close to my heart. Sam, let's go and let's hear about the wonderful work you're doing. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Just firstly, I apologise. There's some building work going on just outside my window, so if you do hear that, I'm sorry. So my name's Samantha Howard, and I'm from Blackpool Carers Centre. I'll introduce a little bit about the work we do, and then kind of go into the project. So if we can have the next slide, please. I think it might be the next two. Yeah, so a little bit about who we support. So we support unpaid carers in Blackpool, and we have teams that are kind of spread across supporting adult carers, young young carers, and also within the young carers team, we have a separate project called the Family Focus project, which supports young people who care for a parent with poor mental health and or substance issues as well. Next slide, please. So a little bit about why we support. A lot of you obviously might know this. Many people don't recognise themselves as a carer, so a lot of the work we do is around raising that awareness within services, around identification of all carers. A lot of them are unaware of the support they're entitled to as well. Kind of statistics show that in secondary schools, 1 in 5 children have a caring role. And provide that practical and or emotional support for somebody at home. According to the census, within Blackpool, there's around 16,000 unpaid carers. So as I've said, a massive part of our role as support workers is around raising that awareness as well. I do quite a lot of work in local schools. So quite a lot of my work is around working with teaching staff, around looking at signs of how to spot young people who might have a care role at home. And obviously we work to improve the health and well-being of carers and ensure that there's no inappropriate levels of care. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the kind of Blackpool demographic. Don't know if any of you have visited Blackpool, but we are kind of the most deprived local authority in the country, and that is reflected in a range of poor experiences and outcomes for its population. 25.6% of the population identified as having a long-term health condition or disability. So obviously that would suggest if there are children in that home under 16, there may be a caring role there. Hospital admissions for mental health conditions are second highest in England. As I've mentioned, the census identified, this was back in 2011. We are holding our breath, waiting for the new census results as well. 16,000 unpaid carers, 8% of which are under 25. And then onto the project, we've got the second highest rate of armed force veterans who are in receipt of a pension, more pension or compensation payment. So we're aware that there are a lot of veterans out there, a lot of members of the armed forces community. So this was a really good project for us to have. Next slide, please. So a little bit about our project. So the aims were for us to work collaboratively with other organisations to highlight and identify young carers who are part of an armed forces family. We wanted to raise awareness within Blackpool surrounding the issues young carers face and kind of the impacts that care role has on a child or young person and their family. And a big part of it was we wanted to develop our literature to highlight armed forces specifically. So we were always aware of it, we always knew it was out there, and obviously we have had referrals in the past for young carers who cared for someone who'd been a veteran. However, we never specifically monitored it, so it kind of enabled us to do that. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges we face. So when we first started this project, our first port of call was to go. We have an army barracks not far from here, probably about 10 minutes from here. So our first idea was to go there. We know there's going to be veterans there, or people still within the armed forces. Sorry, and we know there's children living on site as well. So That was our first idea, to go there, talk about the support we provide. However, when we made contact with them, although it's really close by, it kind of falls outside of Blackpool, and it's Lancashire as well. However, we did provide kind of our literature and signposting to Lancashire Carers Services, so the barracks do have that information. So any carers on site do have access to support there. We then tried the local veteran support groups, which, when we made contact with them, we visited a couple of them, and a lot of the attendees were kind of the older age bracket, so they were unlikely to have children under 16 providing care. Although from that, a member of our adult carers support team now goes there regularly to support any adult carers within that group. And she obviously has that awareness as well. If there is someone who attends who has a child under 16 who's providing care, to signpost to us. So we've still built that relationship, which is obviously positive. Partnerships with local young people services were unlikely to know that if the child lived within an armed forces family. So us working with children went straight to kind of our partnerships we have, so local young people's counselling services and other kind of support services. We reached out to them and said, are you likely to know if this child is a member of a family who's in the armed forces? If so, we're here, refer to us. And the response from that was around that they're unlikely to know. It's not something they would necessarily ask or would come up in conversation. And then obviously, due to COVID-19, face-to-face engagement with young carers and their families was difficult due to restrictions, as well as kind of their own anxieties and health vulnerabilities around that as well. So they were some of the challenges we faced. Next slide, please. So our achievements, compared to our aim, so we did adapt our young carers literature. So our referral forms, we adapted those for referrers. So on the referral forms, we now ask, is this young person part of, or has a family member that's part of the armed forces? So we know at the point of referral, we know that then if it's a yes or a no, and we can monitor that. And we've also adapted our initial parental consent forms. So our referral process, once we receive that referral, we then go out and gain parental consent to work with that child. So we also ask it then as well. So even if it's on the referral, it being on the consent form, even if it just jogs a conversation around it. And that's proved to work really well as well. We, as I said before, I work quite closely with schools, and we do a lot of awareness raising in schools. So we adapted our school assembly presentations so that when we're presenting to the young people themselves, we include it. And again, it just kind of jogs their thinking to think, oh, my dad or my mum or whoever it might be was in the armed forces. If they're struggling physically, mentally, it just jogs that kind of thinking as well. We joined the Lancashire Armed Forces Covenant Hub. That was brilliant, actually. I've attended a few of those, and just my awareness of services out there has massively improved, and I share that with my colleagues as well, in terms of being able to signpost these families to the correct and appropriate support. And also work collaboratively with, as I said before, the adult carers team to build those partnerships with the community groups. Next slide, please. So some of the other achievements was around awareness events with statutory adult services. So as I mentioned before, we went to young people services and the response from that was that they wouldn't necessarily know. So we thought if we go to adult services and encourage them to, broaden their thinking. So if they're going in to support an adult in a household, are there children there? If there are children there, are they likely to have a caring role? And we went in last week, we went and presented to a group of adult social workers, and they said, sometimes they don't think outside the box. They know there's a child in that household, but they might not necessarily think of them as being a young carer. And from that, we had the conversation around, it's not always a practical caring role. Just because a child's not helping with cooking, washing, cleaning, doesn't mean they're not impacted by that person's health, whether it be physical or mental. So that was really positive. having that conversation with the adult social workers, and they said, we are going to think about when we go in now, looking at that bigger picture, and obviously provided them with all our kind of referral pathways. Big achievement for us was that greater awareness of issues and barriers that armed forces community face, and the kind of learning of how we can overcome those barriers. So I think we know that the stigma around accessing services, we are a voluntary organisation, we're a charity, and I think that does work in our favour sometimes. It's kind of that reverse psychology. You don't have to access us, so sometimes it makes people want to more. We now have some colleagues embedded into the local hospital as part of the hospital discharge team as well. That's worked really positively. It's quite new, but it is working positively because it means we can pick up those carers from that point of discharge. And even if they are an adult carer, still, if there's children within that household who are taking on a caring role, that's another avenue for us as well. And the new partnerships have provided us with a great platform to raise awareness and widen the reach of our messages regarding young carers. And I think, just next slide, I think that's everything. Yeah, that is everything.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Are there any questions for Samantha? I think you've stunned them all into silence, Samantha. Well, while people are thinking, and just while we get our next presenters ready, I've just shared in the link to you all a lovely little film called Codename Carer, which was developed by Action for Carers Surrey. Please feel free to use that. Samantha, I would say with my work with the armed forces, one of the things I've noticed with young carers is the risk around losing contact during deployment cycles, and the fact that a young carer may move 10, 11 times in their school life, and they may start with you in Blackpool but then rapidly move on out of that area. And I guess it's really around how we make that transfer so that if they are receiving a young carer service in your area, can we put them in touch with other services where they're going?
Yeah, and we have that a lot outside of the armed forces community. Blackpool's a very transient town, and we work with a lot of young carers who are constantly moving for all sorts of reasons, and we do that a lot. We research into where they're moving to. Do they have a local young carers service? Refer on to them. But it is difficult. It is difficult sometimes because sometimes they're not in a place for very long and then they move on again, and it's that person's responsibility from wherever they are to, we know it's everyone's responsibility to support these children in whatever way, but sometimes there is kind of miscommunications, isn't there? And it's really difficult.
Well, thank you so much. And Samantha, I hope we can work together too on some of this for the legacy work. So get in touch on email. Okay, so delighted now to welcome Shana Rain. Shana, are you with us? So we're looking forward to hearing about your project, ASD Carer Support Group. Shana, are you with us?
I am indeed.
Oh, wonderful. Go ahead. You've got just over 10 minutes.
Oh, well, I've only timed myself for 10 minutes. I'm going to give you
good. Go ahead, Shana.
For those of you who don't know me or haven't come across me, my name is Shana Rain and I am the Adult Services Director for Autism Bedfordshire, but I actually cover services across Bedfordshire, Milton Keynes and Hertfordshire. But I'm sure as many of you have found yourself as you've grown, you don't want to lose your name because that's how everybody knows you. So I then have to go into an explanation that I do also cover Hertfordshire and Milton Keynes. So I'm going to be telling you today about a project that we've been working on in the last 12 months, which is looking at the support that's available to carers that are autistic themselves, and the adjustments that are being made to understand the difficulties that autistic carers are facing when trying to access services. So if I could ask somebody to start my slides, that would be fabulous. If you could just drop to the next one for me, that'd be great. Lovely. So I've given you kind of the highlight of what this project is, but I'll just break it down a little bit further for you to kind of just cover it for those of you who haven't previously been in the meetings with myself. So we wanted to help autistic adults identify if they themselves are carers one thing we recognised during this project is there are a huge number of autistic people that act as carers that don't recognise themselves as being carers, sometimes because they don't know what a carer is, but more often not because nobody talks to them or has that even inkling that an autistic person could be a carer. As many of us know, that is incorrect, and there are lots of people with disabilities themselves who do care for others in their family household or for people that live close by. We also wanted to understand what services were available to those within the local authorities and within health, and to make sure that reasonable adjustments were happening, and if they weren't, which local authorities weren't applying those reasonable adjustments. So that was kind of the carers assessment side of things, but we also wanted to create a variety of easy read documents for those autistic carers and to kind of make the project long term as well. So whilst we might not be able to run those groups moving forward, we wanted to create a bank of resources for people so they could continue to access services and support where needed. So those are kind of the aims of our project. So if someone could just move me on to the next slide, that'd be fab. Excellent. So what do we want to learn? So a better understanding of why autistic carers don't identify, what the barriers are and how we can remove them, what reasonable adjustments are happening and what aren't happening, and what do autistic carers want. So I'm just going to take you kind of through what we've learned during the project now, so we can move to the next slide. So what have we learned? So one of the biggest issues faced by our members is that they actually feel really let down by their local authorities. So, for example, when they have a care needs assessment, they are offered a family assessment and not an individual one. So their carers' needs aren't being considered as individuals. One of the other things is as well that when asking social workers for certain things or people that are coming out to carry out these care needs assessments is that they're not listened to. They're told what they're going to get because they're autistic, and so they kind of get written off quite early on about what it is that they want and what they want to get out of these appointments and where they might go to get additional support. So when someone who is autistic is offered respite, they find it hard and they find it's a hindrance, not a help. And this is due to the social workers not understanding the autistic needs. So the changes to routines within the family household are causing issues and not actually helping. They're not coming in and trying to understand the autism, and it causes a lot of upset in the family unit. So adults feel that when they support family members as carers at health appointments, their communication needs aren't met. So that person who is the carer understands what the person in their household is going through. But if they struggle with communication or they want to bring a letter or notes, the person who's working with them in health won't understand, so they won't take them on, they won't read them, they won't give that person additional time to process the questions they're being asked, so they rush through those appointments and they're not able to communicate the needs of the person they're caring for, or to be able to talk about the things that they've seen that could be causing an issue further down the road or even being an issue there and then. So the next slide, please. So this is just a little bit how we've linked in. I just went through a lot of the questions that I was asked, and I thought it'd just be helpful to kind of give you those overviews. So I'm very black and white in my work, as I'm sure you can all see now. Probably comes from the nature of the job that I do. So I do count myself as very, very lucky. I work very closely with my CCG and ELFT. I'm very, very fortunate. They will do everything they can to go above and beyond to help the projects that I'm working on. And I work very much in partnership with them. So every time I was doing a new event, they would pass it around to all of their workers. They'd pop it on the intranet for them internally, and they would make sure that it was going out in newsletters to make sure it reached a wide range of people. But also our local CVSs, we work very closely with an organisation in Milton Keynes that supports those who are autistic and those with a learning disability. So they were sharing it around with their colleagues, but we were also working locally with carers in Milton Keynes and carers in Hertfordshire, who also really gave us a hand up in terms of making sure that we understood the legislation completely, because it's something that we're not experts in. It's something we know about, but I would not like to pretend that I'm an expert when it comes to legal matters around being a carer. And there's a lovely, lovely lady from Carers in Hertfordshire who was great and would meet with myself and Lisa regularly to give us that breakdown of information, but also just to give us advice and let us check in on where our thought processes are at, which was just fantastic. So the next part, please. So the challenge that we faced during COVID. So I think for all of us in the last 12 months, it's been up and down, and certainly for someone who's autistic, that constant change and not knowing what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen caused a massive issue. So a lot of people weren't able to join, and I think that was partially down to the fact that we couldn't plan very far ahead because they had carers' responsibilities. They didn't want to commit to something if things were going to change again, and whether they would be able to support people with going to their support groups or their children was going to support groups or social groups, whatever was going on in that household. We know that carers have very little time, so we just wanted to make it as easy as possible for them. So we made sure that our resources were available online where people couldn't attend but wanted that carers support and advice that we were giving. We were delivering one-to-ones in a time frame that suited them, as opposed to them coming to a project that suited us. We also created free downloadable resources which were accessible via our website and are available 24 hours a day. Our members have also said to us that one thing they would have enjoyed was actually meeting face to face and having that opportunity to give each other peer support, because that was a huge outcome on this project, was meeting other people who were autistic but also carers. So understanding each other's needs was fantastic. So that's a huge thing for us to take forward. So we can move to the next slide. So here are just some of like the highlights of the numbers of what we achieved in the last 12 months of the project. So we delivered 7 workshops. We created 7 easy read free downloadable resources. We created a web page and we supported 16 adults. So that's 16 autistic carers who are adults in our services. If we could move on to the next thing. So how will the work be sustained and spread? So like I said earlier, we have launched a webpage that is dedicated to supporting autistic carers. This page will stay online, so it will continue to be active, so it can continue to be accessed. The free downloadable resources have been created and popped on the website to support autistic adults. But also, like I said earlier, we are sharing these with our local authorities and our health partners so that they can be shared across the across our ICS, I guess I should say. Trying to think of how to amalgamate Bedfordshire and Milton Keynes there, so that they can be used by social workers or health workers, support workers, so they've got access to those resources, don't need to worry about accessing them off our webpage. They've got them to hand and can send them out to make sure that information is being broken down in an easy read format that autistic adults can understand. The next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you guys kind of a screenshot of what our easy read resources looked like. Now I use the colour green because that is the colour that my adults picked for using resources. There's a lot of research into colours and autism and what is most accessible. And I gave the adults kind of the spectrum of colours to choose, and they told me that they wanted green and white because they felt that it was the most relaxing, but also helped them understand it in a way that was comfortable for the eye, so it didn't cause sensory overload. The next one, please. So this is just a screenshot of what the web page looks like if any of you want to have a look at it. And as you can see, where you can see the little red writing, apologies, it is quite small. That is where you can click on and get the free downloadable resources that we've created as part of this project. And we just explain a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it and who we're working with from the funding of the project, so people can have that information. And if you could just move on to the next slide. So I just wanted to also share some feedback with from our membership for those who have access to this support. So being able to share my own experiences with other autistic people that understand my experiences as an autistic carer. I don't feel so alone anymore. Peer support has clarified how others are managing and what strategies they are currently using. Members have gone away and embedded these into their own routines. The validation I now receive from others, I realise I do not have so much to carry, and I'm a good parent and a carer that tries every single day. Setting up this group has given me hope that we are being listened to and that services may improve in the future, and that autistic carers have a voice in the future and will not be forgotten. The next slide, please. So that was a very quick whistle-stop tour of the work that I was doing. But I think what's really apparent, I would really like to share with you guys from doing this project, so I was actually one of the people that worked on this as frontline as well, was that carers organisations, not necessarily organisations, sorry, but carer sections within the local authorities and some of those that support carers, we need to make sure that things are accessible for people that are autistic, and make sure that it's not just group support that we're putting on, that things get put up in an easy read format, and that people can have that one-to-one support where they need it, because group situations can be excruciatingly painful for someone who's autistic that struggles in being a big environment or a noisy environment, and we need to make sure it is accessible to those people. From looking at my numbers, and I shared this in a group previously with with this group, I should say, is that we recognise that 1 in 25 autistic people are carers. So if we were to look at that across the country, we have a huge cohort of carers that we don't understand, and we need to make sure that services are improved to support these people. We know that without carers, caring doesn't go on, and we need to make sure that those adults are supported and continue to be supported. And there needs to be work done around, reasonable adjustments in the carers assessments. If you're autistic and you have a care needs assessment, you get to meet your social worker or the person carrying out for an appointment before you have your assessment. That should be happening if the person is a carer and autistic, so they get used to that new person, they understand what's going to happen in that meeting. But these things aren't happening, and we aren't making those adjustments that legally we are required to do. So I think there needs to be a lot more work around how we need to improve services in health and social care. Sorry, I forgot that word.
That's all right, Shauna. That's an absolutely wonderful canter through that fabulous presentation, and so interesting. I'm going to throw the floor open now for questions to Shauna. Anyone have any questions? Just raise your hands. Otherwise, I'm going to leap in because I have a question for Shauna. Anyone else? Well, while you're thinking, Shauna, I'm interested in looking at the dynamic support register and how that might be used to incorporate support for carers in an emergency. Did any of that ever come up in your conversations?
We did talk about it when we were looking at our additional support day with the adults. But it was too much information for the adults. I don't know if that's ever been fed back.
What would make it easier then, Shauna? What can we do to make that easier?
A lot of it is the language that we use. Now, I'm sure that all of you have this, but every local authority and every health use different forms. And that includes my own local authority. I have 3 local authorities just in Bedfordshire, and then I have one in Milton Keynes as well. But everybody uses different forms. And therefore, depending on where you go will depend on the information that you're required to give to that person. There needs to be one consistent form throughout the country that everybody uses and that everybody understands. And we just need to make sure that when we're creating these new forms that we consult with carers, autistic people, people with learning disabilities, so that the forms are accessible to everybody. So we're not having 10 different forms for 10 different things, but it's all really the same thing, isn't it? And that we just need to not use ambiguous language. I don't know if any of you are like me, but I love easy read documents. It stops me having to read a 500-page document, and I get to read a 5-page document that gives all of it to me. And we just take away that ambiguous language. Let's create a video, where someone's completing the form online with no noise around it, so people can keep referring back to it. So whenever they're filling out these forms, they've got the video to refer back to support them, and it can be done in that person's own time.
Well, there's a lot of agreement. I can see lovely Jackie from Rutland is saying she loves an easy read version too. I think that there's a club of us on this call. I suppose in terms of staff training though, Shauna, I pick up your point about carer assessments and the barriers and challenges that faces. Is there anything to be said around improving staff awareness about carers who have autism?
I'm literally writing out some notes on one of the local authority strategies that I've been asked to review, which kind of
I might send you sorries then.
So apologies if I come across like I'm getting on my high horse, but it's one of those things I'm really passionately about. And anybody who comes into contact with somebody who is autistic that works for health or social care has to legally have training, but this is not happening. Now, if we know that our staff in the local authorities are working with people that are autistic, regardless of whether the fact their specialism is, carer support, they will come into contact with people that are autistic. Therefore, they should be doing this training to make sure they can support that need, but it is not happening and it's not good enough. Sorry.
No apology necessary, and it's lovely. I can feel your passion even if we can't see you, Shauna. So
camera off, apology.
Camera's off. No, not at all. And if you're more comfortable with your camera off, that's fine. So perhaps one of the legacies, Shauna, is to look at that specific need and to actually embed that within our carer awareness training.
Absolutely, and that would be phenomenal. And that's the key thing that I really want everybody to take away today, is to make those adjustments and to understand autism better, because there are so many autistic carers out there who do phenomenal jobs. And, you know, without them, we would really be lost. I know the difference that a lot of the adults I support make, whether it be, you know, supporting their own children that are autistic as well, or acting as a carer for a partner who has dementia, which is something we're seeing at the moment as well, or supporting a parent who's become poorly in their older age and they're caring for their elderly parent. We just need to make some small changes, and those small changes will make the world of difference to the autistic community in how we move forward.
And so, how can we embed this learning, Shana? What is your last message to us before we get joining in the back to the main group?
Oh gosh, there's so many things. I'm going to try and pull it down to kind of the key areas. So it would be, make sure that everything is easy read. Just everything on your website, down to your case studies, if that's what you've got, to your forms, you know, make sure it's easy read. The thing I'll be petitioning health for is the videos that I spoke about earlier, because it's all well and good having a doctor tell you for 5 minutes how to fill a form out or what needs to go into that form, but if you struggle with sensory overload and processing information, it is not your an area that you need support with, I should say, then those videos will make a huge difference to everybody, not just someone who's autistic, but for every carer who is struggling and tired and thinking about 10 million different things all at one time. Just be able to reflect on that and go to it in your own time when you have those few minutes just to fill that form out would be huge. But also for all staff, not just, you know, health and social care staff, all CBS staff, to partake in autism awareness training and to understand that autism is a huge spectrum, and there are lots of able autistic people who need that understanding, who act as carers.
Shana, I don't know whether you can pop in the chat box any links to any e-learning training that might just remind people of where they can access training. I'm just going to, while let me have a quick look at the chat. Hayley, how are we doing for time? Are we about now to ready to go back to the main room? Any words on that?
Yeah, we're due to go back now, so good time to finish.
Good time to finish. Well, I just want to end by thanking our presenters this morning. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I think something that Jen said right at the beginning is that intersectionality. You know, today we've heard carers from the LD community, from the armed forces community. We've just had a fantastic presentation for carers who have autism. I mean, that intersectionality is there. We're not just a number, are we? There's a whole background. So thank you on behalf of all the presenters. Really great stuff. And please go away, share that learning now with colleagues in your areas, and do reach out to our speakers if they can be of any support to embed some of that learning in your own areas. So thank you very much. We'll wait now until Steve pulls us back into the main room and we have the plenary. But if there are any questions, do feel free. Oh, I think Rachel's just popped a quick question in. I don't know whether we'll get cut off, but oh, and Shana's added her email. Shana, I think you're going to be there's going to be a lot of friends for you now, because that was just so inspiring. Rachel, did you want to say anything?
Sorry, Debbie, no, it wasn't a question, it was more of an observation.
Oh.
Oh, there we go. Mm-hmm.